Hey guys, I thought that I would make a quick video, maybe not so quick, of just thinking about a lot of stuff today. Um, and so one of the things that I've been thinking about is, so I'm in Austin, Texas now. I just kind of recently returned from living abroad for like, you know, 5 years or so, a little bit longer than that. Um, and I've been working remotely. I'm a sort of like a software engineer. Um, and I've had more or less the same job ever since I've lived abroad. So I was in, before I started working for the company that was fully remote that I got. It's a Western company. I was in Asia when I landed that job. Um, I used to work for a big Chinese company, and I spent a lot of time in China. I'd go back and forth between America and China. We had a lot of, it was a Chinese company. We had a lot of American customers. And so I would be going back and forth a lot, spent a lot of time in Hong Kong and in southern China. Um, and shortly thereafter, I moved over to Asia full time. Me and my wife at the time was since divorced. Um, and the job that I have had, I don't really care about that much. They don't make a product, a platform that I have any kind of investment in. I don't really care about it. I don't think that it adds value to the world. I think that it's just a money making thing. Um, and so that coupled with kind of like my marriage, which was eroding away after I went over to Asia. I was married for 7 years. So quite a long marriage. And as the marriage was kind of like eroding away, and me and my then wife were spending tremendous amounts of time apart from one another in different countries and stuff like this, just kind of both focusing on our careers. Her career necessitated a lot of travel to multiple countries in Asia and back to the United States and to Europe. She travels a lot for work. And I was more or less stationary, living in Thailand, and then we moved to Singapore for a few years, and things ended in Singapore. And as I was doing that, my health was declining, and it was declining from my own doing. I developed kind of like mild alcoholism. I'm not like I wasn't coping with any, I wasn't sad. I wasn't depressed. I wasn't particularly angry. I didn't have any very strong emotions or anything like that. I was just kind of empty. I was just kind of spending a lot of time doing something that I didn't care about whatsoever. That didn't really mean anything to me. My significant other that I was together with for a really long time was spending a tremendous time apart, from me. Um, I've never lived in one place for longer than 2 years since I was 16 years old. So I've lived all over the United States. I've lived all over Asia, East Asia, and Southeast Asia. Um, so I never really have a strong foundation. Oftentimes I would meet people, my longest lived friends that I've ever had were in, sorry, let me move this up here. The longest lived friends that I ever had were in high school, because I went to two different high schools. And I've always been a somewhat social person, but I've viewed a lot of relationships that I've had as like very casual as very kind of like ephemeral, because I'd move, and so I've never really had a strong sense of community. I'm not religious, don't go to church, never built community from church. I'm a software engineer, but I'm a very like I'm not a very liberal person. I have some liberal tendencies or whatever, but I'm not a very liberal person. So the vast majority of people that I would meet in engineering roles that worked around me, when I back in the day when we used to do in office work, which I haven't been in an office in years and years and years. I didn't really have too much in common with very many people that I've worked with, although I have made some kind of like long-lasting friendships at work with people that I'm still in contact with. But yeah, I just started to feel very kind of like no community, no roots in the areas that I was at. It's a really cool experience to travel. I can speak conversational Japanese. I speak really shitty Chinese. Meet people from very different backgrounds, see the way that people live in different parts of the world. I've actually come to realize that in many ways, like if in urban Chinese areas, big cities and stuff like that, over there in China and stuff like that, I think that realistically, like a lot of urban Americans and urban Chinese people aren't have a lot more in common than you would expect. Even though the cultures are pretty different, the people and the feeling that you get when you're in a social setting with the people and the things that you like will kind of talk about and the things that you'll kind of do are very similar to what you would expect out of friends that you make on a casual basis in America or something like this. At least that's my experience. But since I was spending all of my time doing things that I didn't really care about, and I didn't have roots set down anywhere in any of the locations that I was staying at, and my one kind of like person that was very grounding to me at the time, which was my wife, we spent such a tremendous amount of time apart. I would be alone in a lot of these things a lot, and luckily I'm not quick to feel loneliness or whatever. Like I said, I've been living pretty nomadic lifestyle since I was a teenager, and so I'm quite accustomed to this. And in fact, like I start to get pretty antsy if I'm in one place for too long. I start to get the itch to kind of like want to like I wonder what this country is like, or I wonder what this state that I've never been to before is like, or whatever. And I often will just pick up and do it because luckily I have a pretty transferable skill set with work and everything like that. But in the age of remote work, like that doesn't even really matter that much. You could be pretty much anywhere in the world and write code, and And so recently I got laid off from my job, and my last day is next week. But as I was getting laid off, one of the common things that's been a constant in my life, one of the very few things that have been a constant in my life, is video games. I've been really into video games since literally before I can even remember. My mom will tell me, you were playing, Mario on the NES, like when you could barely walk, and you're pretty good at it. You would be better than like most of the adults. I mean, mind you, back then, now gamers are amazing and make careers out of playing it. But back in the 80s, in the early 90s, it wasn't very common. There are a lot of cool games that came out around this time, but there wasn't a lot of kind of people that would sit in front of a TV for 8 hours playing video games, at least none in my life, and I was like kind of the only one that I knew that liked to play video games so much. And I've always wanted to create a video game. My last video that I made was kind of going over raycast stuff. The change that I've made to my development kind of like process with raycast that I'm doing right now is I moved to Go, even though not coding in Go is one of my explicit reasons for wanting to use Zig in raycast. But you know, I was running into a lot of language things that's been slowing down the development. I'm building an ECS engine. People that know game design know. People that don't probably wouldn't give a shit anyways. And so like I was able to implement that relatively fast in Go. Well, at least the scaffolding for a basic system and making it somewhat robust. A little bit of premature optimization. I think for things like video games and stuff like that, premature optimization can be a good thing. But that's beside the point. And so I was interviewing with a few video game studios, and I've interviewed with game studios in the past, and I've worked at game studios too and publishers, really major ones. I don't really want to give too much away about places that I've worked or places that I've lived or so on and so forth quite yet. I know nobody probably cares. None of my videos are getting views or anything anyways, but like, you know, I'm putting my face here on the videos and stuff like that. So I want to keep everything kind of on the DL for now, at least. But I've worked at major game studio in the past few years in the past, and now I'm going to mid-size gaming studio. And so I mean, I guess that's kind of spoiler alert. Like before I got laid off, I've been interviewing at other places. One of them was a gaming studio that ended up being converting into an offer. They made an offer for me. The money was quite low. I was very much, I was paid very highly at the position that I've just got laid off from, like much more highly than you would expect for someone with my position at kind of like a smaller startup that did the kind of things that my old employer, or I guess my current employer about to end next week, did. And the video game industry notoriously pays pretty low for their engineers. And so, you know, I was hesitant and I almost passed on it. But then a layoff notification came that same day that I got the offer that was made to me. And I was talking to the TA guy, talent acquisition guy. And, you know, I was expecting a higher offer based off of the data that I had before me and stuff like that, and my performance on the interviews and everything like this. It was all, nobody had any complaints. You know, they made a point out of it to tell me that like the direct quote was, you know, the senior engineer that interviewed me, that gave me one of a few different technical interviews, said that if he had any criticisms of me, it would be nitpicking, right? And so I thought that the offer would entail a larger compensation package than it did, and I almost passed on it on the spot when they were making the offer to me. I wasn't like offended, but I was a little bit like, if I knew that you were going to lowball me like this, I wouldn't have. But I mean, mind you, like I'm overpaid right now. And so my expectations are kind of unrealistic in the first place. And the gaming industry, again, engineers in the gaming industry are generally paid quite low as compared to Meta or Google or, you know, a web development shop most of the time. And so, you know, I said, you know, it turned into like, I need the day. I need to think about this. I need to run the numbers and run my budget and everything like this and look at my savings and see if I can make this work. And, you know, my plan was to pass up on the job, but I didn't want to, you know, tell the guy like, fuck you or whatever, like on the spot and just pass up on it. He was everybody at the company was really cool. I actually enjoyed the interview process, which is extremely rare in tech interviews. Tech interviews are fucking torture. Like they're not fun whatsoever. Like it's not necessarily that they're challenging. It's just that it's very soulless, I guess, the whole interviewing process, very mechanical. very kind of like just jump through the hoops that we give you, very high school homework assignment-esque, in my opinion. And so, yeah, so I go back to work, and then my CTO, the guy that I report up to, basically like, hey, we need to slack a little bit. I need to talk to you. I'm like, okay. And we talk, and he gives me the notice that they're laying me off, and give me a couple weeks of notice, which is cool. And I'm just like, like this seems like a sign to me, like I have money saved and stuff like that, so I can still decline the job offer that I got from the gaming studio and spend a couple of weeks looking for something else. I know that the market is very hard out there right now. A lot of people are really struggling, but I've been in the industry for a really long time. I have a very attractive resume. It took me a few weeks to get in. My conversion rate is much lower than it's been in the past. Before, I was living in Silicon Valley, and I would send out a resume, and somehow 3 companies would be getting, not really, that's an exaggeration, but like my point is that like there was no shortage of opportunities and people that were interested in interviewing me. And now I would say that I've probably sent out between 50 and 100 resumes at places, and I've got a handful of callbacks from organizations that I've submitted resumes to. And most of the callbacks that I've gotten have been for things that I wasn't interested in at all. I would meet people. It would be very boring. There wouldn't be any chemistry. I wasn't particularly excited about what they were doing, and so this company that I'm joining, they're working on some really cool projects, on some high profile stuff that, if you're into games at all, you've probably heard of and are anticipating and have played things that have been released by this company. And so, I was excited about that. And then I was meeting the people and clicking with them and everything like this. And in a way, I'm happy that I'm making significantly less money, like 6 figures less money than what I was making, before. And because, I'm thinking back to when I was in Singapore and my marriage was eroding. And, I've always been a pretty fit guy, but I developed gaming addictions. I developed food addictions. I was eating absolute dog shit, fast food, overeating, junk food, which is very uncharacteristic for me. Like, going years back, it became characteristic of me over the final few years of my marriage, because that's what I was relying on. I was just hollow. I felt very hollow, and I was I guess keeping the hollowness status quo and not becoming like depressed, emotionally depressed, although in a way, I guess that it could be argued that I was depressed. But I wasn't becoming very like emotionally depressed or whatever, because I had all of these addictions. They made marijuana legal in Thailand. Of course, it's not in Singapore. They'll fucking kill you if you try to bring pot into Singapore. But in Thailand, it was legalized when I lived there. So I was just fucking getting stoned. I was getting drunk. I was getting stoned when I was working. I was overeating. I was not exercising. My health, it was just, I dislocated my arm and I broke my hand. And I did CrossFit and stuff in Thailand, but after I did all of this, that put me out of commission for a very long time. I messed up my hand really, really bad. Bones were sticking out of my skin and stuff. I broke 2 metacarpals. One of my metacarpals, the pinky, I broke into 3 pieces. Part of the bone was sticking out. It was a really bad, horrific accident. I had to have an operation on my shoulder up here. I've got little scars around here. It was an arthroscopic surgery, so like a keyhole surgery. They fixed the dislocation that I had. And so that put me out of commission. I just stopped working out completely at that point for over a year, almost 2 years. And I guess, this is sort of rambly or whatever, but I guess that the reason why I'm seeing this as a blessing in disguise is because I became really complacent, comfortable and complacent. And I was unhappy with so many different elements in my life that I just kind of like nestled back into the lazy boy and got fucking high and drunk and gave into food addiction and gave into fucking dopamine cycling addictions and stuff like that from video games. And which video games are, I'm always going to play video games. Video games are an important part of my life, but there's everything in moderation. Anything could become a problem. And my video game addiction became a problem for me for sure. And so the first step that I took, I think that was good for me and good for my ex-wife was I said, hey, I think that we need to end things. I think that the course of our relationship is ran through. We were good for each other while we were together. Our lives markedly improved in many different ways. We've traveled all over the place together, seen many things together, had a lot of fun. Your career's really taken off, and so like I think that we should just end things on good terms and kind of go our separate ways. We could still be friends. We could still talk to each other every once in a while. If we're ever passing through the same city, we could see each other, but I don't think that we are meant to be married. And she agreed, came around. It was a very long discussion that went on for multiple days. But eventually, she arrived at the same kind of conclusion. And, I think she's doing really good now. And so, she's a great person. Nobody cheated on anybody. It wasn't a dramatic thing where we were fighting and stuff like that. But it was just kind of like we just grew apart as people. And there just wasn't much of a relationship there. And on paper, staying together probably would have been really smart. We were doing quite well financially and, living all over the world and seeing all these new things and stuff like that. But it was just missing something after a point. And I don't want to, I'm not quick to get back into the dating scene. I'm happy being alone right now. In fact, I think that it's necessary to be alone right now. And so, on paper, things look terrible for me right now. I'm making significantly less money than I have been for the past few years. I'm divorced. I'm single. I'm living in Austin now, which I don't really like. Like Texas is cool. I like the people and stuff like that, but it's all the homelessness and shit that's around everywhere. It just, not to become political or anything like that, but a new administration is cycled in, and they're really cracking down on illegal immigration. And I learned that 20% of hotels in New York City were used to house illegal immigrants, which is fucking insane because we have Americans that are sleeping outside in the cold. But people come from fucking Honduras and from Senegal and they get put into a hotel. Like that's ridiculous to me. We have our own problems. If we could use 20% of our hotels in New York for illegal immigrants, kick them the fuck out, and house our own homeless people and start fixing the homeless problem so that way we don't have homeless people shooting up fucking drugs on the sidewalk around children and stuff like that and freaking out and screaming at people because you don't have $1 to give to them or whatever, and put them into the hotel rooms and get them into rehabilitation programs and stuff like that to put them back into society or to give them the care that they need so that way they're not living a life of suffering and freezing out on the streets. And we're like, we don't care. Like I don't care about Senegalese people. Like, sorry, we have our own problems. I have compassion. My compassion's for the people that are sleeping out on the streets right now. I give them food and coffee and shit like that all the time. I don't fucking care about Senegalese people. Like, they go back to their country. They're their country's problem. The Senegalese people should care about Senegalese people that are fucked. And if everybody's fucked, then they should all work together to try to make their country better. I know that it's much more complicated than that or whatever, but it's just like, you know, the argument is that if you're not concerned for illegal immigrants, you lack compassion. It's like, no, I'm very worried about like young people that are that are depressed and suicidal, and homeless people that are addicted to fentanyl. And not only are their lives ruined, but they're ruining other people's lives that live in the inner city areas and stuff like this. And I think that we should like solve our own problems. And I think that we have the capability to solve our own problems, but there has been a really strong motivation in the government to not solve problems, but to create more problems for the people, keep the people divided, angry, and on the brink of oblivion. And then you could be fucking a corrupt shithead and you could do whatever you want to do because everybody's too busy worrying about basic survival to look upwards and be like, hey, you're raping me for everything that I'm worth. You know, anyways, that's just my opinion about it. Some people differ, that's fine. But for me, the situation that I'm in right now, I think is actually like a blessing in disguise. It takes me out of this kind of like comfort bubble that I've been privileged enough to be in for the past couple of years. And it really tells me, it's like, hey, you've got to like make good moves now again. So I grew up extremely poor in a village up in the mountains in the middle of nowhere. White trash town. Most people did fucking meth there. Everybody, you know, in the early 90s and the mid 90s, everybody was in California. People were walking around with guns on their hips and stuff like that. Why? Because there's no police officers. One cop came to town once a week, and he was at the town hall, this little fucking building, you know, piece of shit building or whatever, because it was a town with a population of like 150 or something like this. And he didn't really like enforce anything. He just came up because he needed to. And so, you know, in California, people, white trash fucking tweakers walking around with fucking rifles and guns on their hips and stuff like that. It was wild. Those places really exist, you know. You talk about kind of like black ghettos or whatever. There are white ghettos too. And I grew up in one. I lived in there until I was 12 years old. It was the longest that I've ever lived in any single place, was this horrible meth den of a town. And so from that point, you know, I was able to start making a substantial amount of money. And not rich or anything like that, but you would expect, if you knew my background, that I would be in jail or dead. And, you know, the fact that I was traveling the world and making a very respectable salary would just be completely unexpected. And the reason why I was able to make that happen is because I was very uncomfortable. I was very worried about food, and I was very worried about if I'd be able to afford to pay for rent. And when you're in dire straits like that, the only thing that you have to rely on is your own resourcefulness. And with this perfect storm of all the other stuff that has happened in my life, the divorce and, you know, everything else that I've been going on about this whole time, you know, I wasn't in dire straits at all. In fact, like, I had everything that I had complete comfort. I could do, I'm bored this weekend, I'll go to Japan and stay in Japan for a week, you know, and so on and so forth. Which is an extreme privilege, but it just became normal to me. That's the way that I was living for a really long time, and it was a good experience, and I'm glad that I did it. But it really breeded complacency and laziness on my part, and so, you know, I'm 36 now. And I need to take care of my health because my body's going to start falling apart really soon if I don't. And the healthcare system in America, which I've already made a video about too, is like completely fucking ridiculous. And so my best first line of defense is to like just have a good body. And that will cover most of the things that will come up, you know. Yeah, flus, complications from getting the flu, complications from getting other sicknesses, which I started to get. Like, you know, when I first came here to America, I had a bacterial infection and it ended up almost closing up my throat. Now, I think that if my immune system was a little bit healthier and I exercised and I was taking, you know, vitamins and stuff like that, like I should be, probably wouldn't have been that big of a deal at all. But the fact is that I neglected my health to the point where it almost fucking killed me. I needed to call 911 because my throat was closing up and I couldn't breathe. It's very scary to wake up in the middle of the night and be like not even choking, but just like breathing through a straw. It's very, very scary. I thought that was it. I thought that was, okay, this is where my life ends in Austin, Texas after all of this. But, you know, luckily it didn't turn out that bad. And so, you know, I'm working on my game now. I'm working for a pretty popular gaming studio that has access to publishers and stuff like this. And so if I play my cards right, I could network and I could meet people. And, you know, when I'm not going to mention anything about a game that I'm building or whatever, but when I have some of the art done and it almost being a finished product, maybe with a couple of months of lead time or something like that, I could start to show it off to people internally and be like, hey, look at this thing that I've been working on. You know, like it would be really cool if I could get into contact with some publishers or whatever that we might have like insider connections or something like that with. And I might be able to make something out of that. And, you know, at the same time, cutting out substance abuse completely. I haven't drank in quite a while. You know, I'm in Texas, so I'm not smoking or anything like that because they don't take too kindly to that around these parts, to key that phrase. And so I think that I just want to live a life that means something a little bit more to me than what I have been doing. Because throughout my entire life up to the point where I was a young adult, I was just concerned about money because I didn't have any. And you think about money a whole lot more when you don't have it than when you do have it. You're looking at the price tags of everything when you're grocery shopping because you only have $100 in the bank, you know? And so the whole first half of my life was like very money focused and very much like, I want to live a life where if I get a flat tire on the way to work, my life isn't ruined. And I've achieved that, which is cool. But now I think that when the time came for me to start thinking about things that had meaning to me beyond that, I got pulled into this haze of, you know, drugs and substances and alcohol and overeating and things that I thought were going to always be a constant in my life that turned out not be a constant in my life. That I stopped the kind of like forward momentum and I lost kind of like what would mean something to me. And I think that opening up a gaming studio and being friends with the people that I work with, being happy to be around them and being happy to facilitate a situation in which like they're able to make a living is a good start. I don't think that's the complete end goal. I don't think if I do that, then I will be satisfied in life or whatever. But I think that's a much more impactful thing than anything that I've accomplished up until this point. And so that's the next thing that I want to work towards and keep thinking about what meaning is to me beyond that. You know, also get myself back into shape. You know, sharpen my mind a little bit, sharpen my body a little bit, maybe become a little bit more robust. um, and able to get a flu and not have it be that big of a deal, and just take it from there. I'm going to be in this city for another year at least, My lease isn't up until then, and that's another thing is I've committed to a bunch of bills and stuff like that when I was making a lot more money than I'm making now. Luckily, I've like if you knew the numbers that I'm paying in like rent and for a car and everything like that, it doesn't seem very frugal, but in comparison with what I was making up until recently, it was relatively frugal, and I can handle it off of my salary that I have now. Not as comfortably, but again, I I'm not sure that I want to be comfortable anyways. I think that like I want a fire under my ass a little bit to be like, hey, you've got to execute on this stuff and you got to execute on it right. Otherwise, there's going to be consequences for you. And so, yeah. Anyways, that's stuff that's been going on in my life recently. Just thought that I would make a video about it. I guess it's not so short in the end, but whatever. So, yeah, I think that as my game comes along a little bit more, as I have things to kind of show off right now, I just have a couple moving squares around. I'm working on collision systems. Remember, I'm not working with an engine, so I've got to build all of these things myself, which is fun. And I think that it's going to end up making a more kind of like, I'll be able to get a better game feel out of stuff. I really like Hyperlight Drifter, Celeste, that those kinds of games, even though one's a side scroller, one's a top down adventure game or whatever. The Zelda games, of course. Rain World is a really huge influence. One of my favorite games of all time. And I want to. Each one of those games has an atmosphere and a feeling to them. I think that I might be able to achieve my own kind of feeling and my own kind of atmosphere that I want to implement in my game better if I have like total control over everything and I'm not relying on like a bunch of pre-existing game systems and point and click stuff like, oh, I'm just going to make this like collidable or whatever. Like, no, I build the collision system and ECS, and I have collision is a component that I have, and I could put that component on whatever entities that I want to or whatever. I think that kind of design agrees with me a little bit more. And so, I want to make something really cool that people can enjoy interacting with. A piece of software that I built that I put my creativity into, that players directly interface with, that, and they choose to. And, the scope of it's probably going to be pretty small, maybe something that could be completed in a few hours. But to me, there's almost a romantic quality to that. Like if somebody chooses to spend a few hours of their time with something that I've created completely. I mean, not completely. I'm using Relib and stuff like that, but you something that I've put together, something that I've largely built. I would say to more of an extent than somebody that uses a traditional game engine like Unity or something like this, although it's not a competition. I'm not trying to make it out like I'm more impressive or something like that, but it's just something that I guess that it would be like an author with a book. If an author writes a book and that book takes X amount of hours to read, and somebody opens that up and is sitting down with that book for X amount of hours until they complete it, just so that way they could get the author's ideas into their head. There's something that's really cool about that to me, that process of creation. And I'm excited to give a really good swing. I'm going to do my best to create something that's really compelling and really fun to interact with. And, if that becomes successful, then maybe I could really build some stuff off of it. So a studio, and I could hire some people and build other games and stuff like this. Again, that's not the end goal to everything, but it might be a cool starting point. Anyways, this video has gone on for a long time. So I'm going to call it here. And I hope that you have a good day.